Umar Zameer has been found not guilty in the death of a Toronto police officer. The verdict took several days for a jury to reach. With more on the court process, we're joined now by Nader Hassan, Zameer's defense attorney. Mr. Hassan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot of emotions in the courtroom spilling out of the courthouse 24 hours later. I'd like to ask you to reflect on this not guilty plea, what it means for the case as we know it nearly 3 years ago, and what it means for your client, Umar Zameer.
Well, it was a tidal wave of relief that we felt in that courtroom when the not guilty verdict was read out. Mr. Zamir and his family, who have been by his side from day one, they've been feeling all kinds of emotions over the past 3 years, and they just felt a real sense of relief. But you know, they're not celebrating. They continue to feel awful for the poor officer and his family, who are suffering and continuing to suffer for the loss of what I understand was an honorable and good police officer. So the Zamir family continues to feel terribly for them. But they're happy that they will have their lives back, and that Mr. Zamir has been deemed and found not guilty by a jury, and he can go back to doing what he should be doing, which is playing with his young kids and building a life in Canada here.
You know, having been in that courtroom when the verdict coming in, as I mentioned, so much emotion coming from that courtroom as this verdict was given. Justice Anne Malloy turned to Umar. She told him he's a free man, and she apologized for what he's been through. As a lawyer, how often do you hear a judge saying those words?
You hear it every now and then, words of empathy or sympathy from the judge once the case is over, and I think it's important to emphasize that. Justice Malloy certainly didn't put her thumb on the scale at all during the proceeding, as she shouldn't. She was very judicial throughout the proceedings. But when it was all over and the jury had spoken, she did say those words, and they seemed heartfelt, and I think it meant a lot to Mr. Zamir and the Zamir family.
During this trial, we learned so much information that we didn't have nearly 3 years ago when all of this happened. And you said that when you first took this case, there was a lot of hatred directed towards your client. What did you mean by this?
Well, there was a lot of hatred directed towards my client. You saw it on the internet, you saw it on social media. People were calling him a terrorist. There's all kinds of racist innuendo in that commentary 3 years ago. I was also getting hate mail for having the audacity to take on this case. I even got emails wishing that my children get run over, which was disturbing and unfortunate to read. But I don't actually blame those people the most. The people I blame the most are the politicians who knew better, who sounded off about this case, who presumed guilt, even though they knew nothing about the case. And for the police, for feeding a false narrative to the public back when they controlled the narrative, and nobody was in a position to challenge their inaccurate narrative back then. The difference between then and now is that Canadians now know the truth. The truth came out during the course of a lengthy trial. And now Canadians were able to see quite quickly, long before the not guilty verdict came out, long before that, Canadians who are following the trial were able to see that this was not some kind of intentional act. This was a young family who was doing nothing wrong, who were approached by plainclothes officers aggressively late at night. They tried to leave. They were boxed in. They were scared. My email inbox has been inundated from messages from people across the country who say, my deepest sympathies for what this poor family has gone through. I would have done the exact same thing in that situation. And what happened was a horrific, horrific accident. No, there are no winners here. Mr. Zamir is clearly not a criminal, and I'm glad that a jury of 12 hardworking Canadians were able to see that too.
You know, there was a lot of information currently right now on the details that police provided that night. There was also a moment during this trial that I want to take you back to. It was your line of questioning with Ida Sheikh, the wife of Umar Zameer, where she said that she felt betrayed by the police, that she was cooperating, and that when she went home, she heard the information that police provided to the public. Can you touch on that and how the family felt about the information that was provided to media and to the public nearly 3 years ago that day?
Yeah, so happy to. A little bit of context is important here. So Mr. Zamir and Ida Sheikh, they thought they were under attack. They thought that when they first saw the plainclothes officers, they thought, okay, is this they asking for money? Is this a robbery? Is this maybe a carjacking? But when that unmarked police van cut them off when they tried to leave, they thought it was something much more sinister. And so Mr. Zamir then reversed and go forward, and not knowing that the officer had fallen to the ground in the melee, and he didn't see him as he drove forward. And they had no idea that these plainclothes folks on foot and in that van, that they were police officers. It was only after they were rammed from behind and extracted from their car at gunpoint. Even then, they didn't know they were dealing with police. Subsequently, the officers who arrested them and detained them identified themselves as police, and then they started to see uniformed officers. And Mr. Zamir began talking to officers right away on the scene, long before he was able to speak with a lawyer and explaining. We had no idea what was going on. We were scared. We didn't know they were police. Now, then Ida gets taken to the hospital after that scene. She's in the hospital all night. The reason she's in the hospital is they've just been rear-ended, and she's 8 months pregnant. And so she was taken to the hospital to check on the baby. There's a police escort who's waiting outside her hospital door all night. And then the next morning, gets taken to the police station where they interview her. And she wants the police to know the truth, so she gives a detailed police interview that, quite frankly, is almost exactly what she testified to at trial. She wanted the police to know right away what had happened, what a horrific, tragic misunderstanding this had all been. But then she goes home after giving that statement, after having gone through this traumatic event. She's got her 2-year-old with her. He hasn't eaten. He's got a full diaper, and she still gives this statement to the police. And then she goes home and she turns on the news, and the police are making statements in public portraying her husband as some kind of horrible terrorist. And she felt betrayed by that. And who wouldn't feel betrayed in her shoes?
You know, the police chief holding a press conference following that verdict outside, he did not take any questions from media. And a big one we had was about the information that was provided that night, but also the testimony of the 3 police officers and their approach that night here. You touched on this briefly during your press conference, but what changes would you like to be made when it comes to how plainclothes police officers approach civilians?
Yeah, I think, the police, they do have regulations and best practices and policies on how plainclothes police officers are supposed to behave. Some of those are pretty good, but I think also they can be improved in a number of ways. But I also think that the police need to know that they should be following their policies and protocols, and not bend the rules whenever they feel like it. But even more important than reform of how plainclothes officers behave when interacting with members of the public, I do think the police need to take a hard look at how they behave in court. And the TPA president congratulated all of the officers who took the stand in this case. Yeah, some of them should be congratulated for telling the truth, but some of them should be reprimanded and disciplined for lying under oath, lying to the Canadian public, lying to the jury. And unfortunately, I am not going to be holding my breath to see that type of accountability.
Listen, I know it's early days. This verdict just came in, and I can appreciate for the family it's been a difficult nearly 3 years. 3 years. Any idea of what comes next for Mr. Zamir and whether or not he wants to pursue a civil lawsuit?
So We haven't talked about that yet. I told him to go home, hug his kids. His two youngest, he has never hugged them as a fully free man yet because they were born while all this was going on. So he and his wife and his mom and his sister and their family and his extended family, they got to take a little bit of time to get back to normal life. I'm not ruling anything out. We're not ruling anything out, but I don't think the police and the administration of justice need to wait for us to do anything to start taking a hard look at what lessons they can draw from this case, from this investigation, to hopefully make all of us as Canadians feel more trust in the system going forward.
What about an appeal if the Crown did seek to appeal? And I know that's a question for the Crown, but you said yesterday that it would probably be for the wrong reasons. What did you mean by that?
I didn't know I said for the wrong reasons. I said that there are all kinds of reasons why the Crown chooses or doesn't choose to pursue an appeal. Sometimes it's for purely legal reasons. Sometimes it's for reasons that are extraneous to the legal analysis. And I don't know if an appeal will be pursued. If it is, we'll be here, ready, waiting to respond. But I'm optimistic that once temperatures cool and someone looks at this case, the dispassion that is required by the Crown Attorney's Office, I think they will come to realize that this was the right result, there was a just result, and that an appeal is neither necessary nor in the interest of justice.
One last question, Mr. Hassan, and this is a personal one for you here. It's really rare that you see an entire legal community so tuned into a specific trial and have so many opinions about the expected outcome here. On a personal note, it sounded like your relationship with Umar Zameer went beyond simply a lawyer representing a client. He called you his angels. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship and why you wanted to take on this case?
Well, look, as a criminal defense lawyer, you are in a position where you get to be a person's champion when they are dealing with the most difficult part of their life. And you might be the only person in their corner other than their family. And they've got the entire apparatus of the state, the police, the Crown Attorney's Office, government, oftentimes public opinion bearing down upon them, and you have to be their champion. And look, I care about all of my cases. I have many clients who I find deeply, deeply sympathetic, even those who have made mistakes. But I will say that I have, over the course of these 3 years, I have come to believe that not only was Mr. Zamir an innocent man, he's also a good person. And yeah, I did feel very emotionally invested in this case.
Okay, Nader Hassan, the lawyer for Umar Zameer. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.